Hello and welcome to specially presentation of the Pencader Heritage Museum. We are a grassroots organization devoted to preserving the history and culture of this remarkable Pencader 100 area south of Newark, Delaware. The history here goes back to the 1600s, and one of the important features here is the fact that this is the scene of the only battle in the Revolutionary War which created this country, known as the Battle of Couch's Bridge. The physical structure we're sitting in is a barn that dates from the mid-1800s, but it's on the battlefield site. And if you were to come to the museum, first and third Saturdays of the month, admission is free, as are these presentations and workshops, which, by the way, we can bring to your location if you are interested for a civic club meeting or something of that nature. You'll find a lot of artifacts from that period, and we're always interested in acquiring others. We will certainly give you credit, and we will be sure that your donation or loan, for that matter, is acknowledged. So we very recently, for example, received a loan of a Revolutionary War 1777 Hessian Army officer's sword, which was probably used in the Battle of Couch's Bridge. And it was found because it was thrown away probably on that day because the tip of the sword is broken. Now the officer using the sword, we don't know how it was broken. It could have been broken in battle, could have been broken using it as a prying tool, fixing a wagon wheel, we don't know. But it was broken, he threw it away because to this officer it was a piece of trash. To us it's a treasure. Some 10-year-old boys back in 1959 roughly found this thing in the mud in the creek, and for years just played with it as a toy. But as they became adults, they realized what this thing was and the fact that it did have a historical significance. So they came to the museum, and one of the fellows, and he loaned that sword, which is on display here. So if you want to see, 1777 to today is about 230 years. We have those artifacts here, and it's like I say, we're always interested in looking for others. For example, there's a rumor that says someone in this state may have one of the uniforms from one of the soldiers in that battle. There's a lot of things in attics and garages and being stored by the families, and they do it for safekeeping because they're a little reluctant to loan them. But we think we're pretty reputable folks, and if you've got any of those sorts of artifacts, please let us take a look at it. We would appreciate it. Now, we're going to talk at the moment for frontier self-sufficiency. When this country was settled, anybody that was bold enough to go out on this frontier had to take everything he possibly needed with him. He had to take all the farm tools, and all the means of daily living, seed corn and potatoes and all of those crops that he was going to be raising, usually matched animals, pigs, chickens, things that he could breed, because he had to be self-sustaining. Now, one of the things about self-sustaining, of course, you had to fix everything, the broken wagon wheels if you could, and a lot of the farm implements are wood-based, and you can work with wood. Blacksmithing was a more serious problem. Some people could do it, some couldn't. What they would do if they could, they would come into towns to a place like this complex we're in, which is Diet Couch's Mill, because around the mill, which ground grain for various purposes, there would also be little support businesses, and one of those would be a blacksmith in all likelihood. So there were ways of you could acquire, the services that you couldn't do yourself. But you may do with as much of yourself as you possibly could. And one of the things is, since wood was the dominant building material, extremely useful stuff, if this country did not have wood, we would be a totally different culture. So what I've got here on the table in front of me is a lot of examples of things that a guy could do himself. Now, in the kitchen, there are a number of ordinary kitchen utensils that you can make yourself, and you'll still see these in the kitchen stores around, sets of wooden utensils, because they don't scrape. For example, even the Teflon pots that we're now using, this is a very safe tool to use, and they're still making them, relatively inexpensive. Bowls, this is a fancy bowl, but it is basically a bowl. Here's a grain scoop. This grain scoop probably took up to 10 hours for me to make. You can buy one for $3 at Kitchen for, you know, in a matter of minutes. So you could build kitchen tools. There's a vase. You could give that to your girl for Halloween. I'm sorry, for Valentine's. You can make toys for the kids, of course. And you know farm animals, so you might well do things like the farm animals. There's a horse. There are mice there. Here's a top, a thumb-operated top. You spin it like that. So, you know, you could make toys for your kids for their birthdays and for Christmas and things of that nature. Okay? And if you were extremely... Here's an interesting thing. There were little things called whittler's tricks. This is a continuous chain. It's carved with these free links. They are not split apart and re-glued to make them free. They're carved in this manner. This particular chain, which I've left unfinished, of course, and it's about 40 years old now. And how in the world it survived that length of time without being accidentally broken, I'm not quite sure, but that's a 40-year-old chain. There was a thing called tramp art, where, you know, on the hobo trains, guys could carve things like this, and maybe in the next town they could get a free meal if they traded this, you know, to the owner. So this was almost a form of currency. All right. The spoons these are called Scandinavian or Welsh love spoons, and a boy might carve one of these for the girl that he was courting. This meant that he was pretty serious. All right. And if she accepted it, she was pretty serious too. So there's a form of courtship. So we've got kitchen stuff, we've got currency, we've got courtship, we've got toys, and over here for the serious adult, if you had a lot of time and a fair amount of skill, you might be able to build a musical instrument. Now the most common one would be a banjo, and from the late 1700s, early 18s, there were forms of the banjo around. The 5-string like this didn't come along until about 1840 or so. This is a 5-string mountain-style banjo. A man could build this at home. He would cut the wood from the forest. The head would be a groundhog skin. No frets, because he wouldn't have the wire. The pegs would be wooden pegs. And with about 100 hours of effort, 100 hours, he could have an instrument. The only thing he would have to buy would be a set of strings, which you could get from Philadelphia or Baltimore. They probably came over on ship because we weren't making them here. All right, if you had a little more time, you might build a fiddle. They were always called fiddles rather than violins. This happens to be a Strad copy, a Strad shape. Stradivarius was the chap back in the 1500s who came up with this basic shape. Well, he's given the credit here. And this instrument would take about 200 hours of time. So in the wintertime, after you repaired all the farm equipment and got the kitchen squared away and everything, you could, if you had the time, night after night, you know, you could carve away at this thing in 200 hours. Again, the only thing you would have to buy would be a set of strings. So people were very resourceful in putting these things together. And in the foreground here is a muzzle loader. Now this happens to be very unusual in that it's a left-handed lock. That's called the lock. And it is a small caliber. It's actually a squirrel gun. Squirrels were one of the primary food sources in the colonial times. The stock itself is a custom stock that is built to exactly fit me. It's curly maple like the back of violins are. The stock itself would probably take about 50 hours of time. But this rifle fits me very, very well, and that makes it very, very efficient to use. So this was the sort of self-sufficiency that the frontier folks had to be able to perform. And they became very adroit at it, and the things that they could do with very little resources were very remarkable. So, well, that's just an introduction of the sorts of self-sufficiency, you know, that the frontier folks could do, and we could talk quite a bit more. For example, I could spend almost 200 hours in talking about the instruments, but we won't do that. We'll just say that we thank you folks for watching this, and we hope you come see us at the museum. Thank you.